Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider Indianapolis Star. This is Mind Your Banners for Friday, April 11th. I'm sorry, it's been a while. The NCAA tournament kind of ate up my bandwidth for the last couple weekends. Mike Niziolek has been holding down the fort at IU football practice. We will do a big football spring game preview next week. Mike, probably Monday or Tuesday, I think is what we're aiming for. But today we wanted to just kind of catch up more on the basketball side of things. We haven't really talked since Darian DeVries was hired. In fairness, some stuff has happened. It's not like the entire roster's been put together. But I guess the first question to you, Mike, is how are you on this fine Friday afternoon? Are you watching the Masters?
No.
Why are you not watching the Masters?
No, I don't partake.
See, I don't do a lot of golf, but the Masters is a bit of a rite of passage for me. Like it's an annual thing, It's in Georgia.
It is an annual event, so it'd be hard to do it more than
it's the spring. Yeah. Rory's back. I mean, he's 5 under today.
Was that your freebie that you're wearing right now?
No, I bought this.
Wow, they made you buy it?
What, they being who? The NCAA, the vendors at the Fan Fest?
The award-winning reporter here had to buy his own merch. You don't get like a shirt?
I got a plaque.
They don't give you for the
should I be wearing that on my chest?
You should. There it is.
It's hanging around my neck like a.
There's a spot over your right shoulder, left shoulder, right shoulder that you could hang it right there on the wall. That big, yeah. There you go, on that white space. That would go. Bring the room together.
We've lived in this house for like 4 years, and I'm still like, we're gonna do The Office soon. I've got all kinds of like Liverpool stuff that needs to go up, and it's just like.
Well, now you got a plaque to center everything. Center everything around that plaque.
That's true. What you go ahead. You go first. They
don't get like the bowl games. You usually get like a little gift for getting out there. You didn't get. They don't end yet. No.
I didn't. I mean, there were some pins. Pre-program, which for some reason, because of the glossy material they put on the cover, they said you needed to take it in your carry-on. Because if it would set off something in the machinery they use to scan checked luggage, and that it would make it more likely they would need to crack open your checked luggage and figure out what it was.
We've taken your program. It's dangerous. This is a weapon.
There were signs like everywhere in the arena.
That's so weird. It was just like the chemical.
Buy a program, take it back in your checked luggage.
The chemical inside the glossy cover.
I don't know. I don't know what. I didn't ask what. I didn't ask what exactly ran afoul of TSA screening procedures, but the program made it back. I made it back. You never left. And Darian DeVries is starting. Did you like that segue? That was smooth. Darian DeVries is starting to pull together his first Indiana team. A couple. Let's talk players first, because I do think there's going to be a lot of movement on that in the next 7 to 10 days. This was always bound to kind of be a really busy portal period, and I think it's only gotten busier because of the situation with the house settlement, the fact that it's not going to be. It wasn't approved last week. It's not clear whether it's even going to be approved, like in the next few days, or it may.
Well, but I mean, they missed your dedeline because he only signed three players before that. So
maybe they knew. Maybe they talked to Judge Wilkin, and they knew more than I did. But a couple players unsurprising. Tucker DeVries in the door. Trent Sisley stays. There was a lot of noise around Connor Enright basically from the moment he hit the portal. DePaul guard who played for DeVries at Drake. I think the first sort of, I don't know if I want to say surprise name, but the first like big sort of, less obvious name was over the weekend, Reed Bailey, Davidson forward. In the portal, I think Kentucky was mentioned with him, a couple other high major teams. He picks Indiana. He's going to be here on a visit this weekend. I know you have been crunching film on Reed Bailey. So what are your initial thoughts of Indiana's new stretch four?
No, but I think the overall point is that like it's hard to grade a roster or even an individual piece of it without. I mean, they only got 4 players, right? I mean, so it seems like it's very incomplete in terms of trying to see how it all fits. I mean, you know, with Reed, you notice his experience. I think he started every game he's played in 3 years of college basketball. Um, he's improved every year. Got to the free throw line a lot. I mean, that stands out. I mean, you know, in a big way. Um, but I mean, how these all pieces all fit together. I mean, he's got maybe three fifths of the starting lineup. You know, maybe Sicily comes off the bench, but you don't know. So right now, it's very hard to sort of see what the entire vision is for the roster with so few players on it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit like almost the part of, I mean, like, I think Enright happens, Sicily just stays in the fold. And I think Enright happens as a matter of just timing and convenience. He goes in the portal very early in the process. Indiana's got an obvious interest in him because of his background with Darian DeVries. I wouldn't even necessarily, pencil him in as a starter, at this point. Like,
I'm
I
just
don't
saying,
know.
like
But like,
best case,
but,
like most
but my
that's what.
point is, it almost kind of seems like between some of the guys that the guys they've signed and the players they're targeting. Lamar Wilkerson will be here this weekend, from my understanding. Um, there are a couple others. It almost seems like Indiana's kind of trying to nail down its alphas first. Like, DeVries will be one, and it's likely Bailey will be one. You won't expect Bailey to produce at Indiana at the level that he produced at Davidson. Although the A10 to Big Ten jump is probably not as substantial as some of the jumps that they're going to be asking some other players to make from a competitive perspective this season. So it'll be interesting to see how that translates. It kind of seems like Indiana's priority is, let's get the biggest pieces in place first. We also saw Indiana involved with Conwell. We saw Indiana involved with Ryan Conwell, that is. We saw Indiana heavily involved with Josh Dix. It just sort of feels like, if you're Indiana, it's, let's get the major pieces in place first, and then potentially let those pieces, their strengths, their weaknesses, the holes that remain in the team, kind of inform how we fill the roster in around them.
But I
Now, I
don't
think Indiana.
necessarily. I think the question would be, and I don't know if they'd answer it honestly. Is it less about basketball, more about budget? Right? Like if you're going to take big swings at the guys that are high, like Lamar Wilkinson. I mean, he listed what, like 5 teams he's going to be visiting, and they're all sort of heavy hitters. Like, how much can you spend on him, and then how much do you have for the rest of the team, or how much you have on this group? Like, you do have to prioritize at a certain point because there is a budget. It's not unlimited, and the basketball piece obviously is a part of it, but you'd think now with teams numbers wise, you have to sort of make it all work, right? And you can't just promise everything to everybody. And so if you're going sort of for guys that are frontline guys where they're competing with other Power Five, top or Power Four top tier basketball programs, you have to be careful, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you do. I mean, I don't. I guess I'm not sure. Like, what, I'm not sure what in their approach is bad,
I
because
didn't
I
say
mean,
bad. I just said that might be what dictates how you miss on Dix, so then you go to the next because they were very deliberate in the first couple of weeks about who they had on campus and kind
yeah.
of slow, and so you're trying to see how much you have to spend on sort of the rest of the guys. That's kind of what my point was. I didn't say there was
No,
any
I think. I mean,
negative connotation to it.
I think it's kind of like, I think those two things, I think, can exist side by side. Like, the
Yeah,
idea that on the you're looking for the players that you're building around on the floor, and then also those players are naturally the ones you're going to commit the most money to. So you're going to want to lock up the big pieces that you can sort of count on before you start worrying about filling in around them. And I think you're right from a money perspective. That's going to be part of it. I just also think from a skills perspective, if Indiana had gotten Josh Dix, then that maybe informs two or three other targets for things that Indiana feels like it doesn't, it doesn't get with Josh. It gets all this other stuff with Josh Dix, but he can't do this or this. So we've got the players that we fill in behind him in the rotation need to be able to do those things. Whereas, let's say it's Ryan Conwell instead. Well, then Indiana's, I think, going to have a different idea potentially of who they're looking to fill in around. Because, Reed Bailey's a great example. And for those, I imagine a lot of people who are listening kind of know who I'm talking about. But for those who don't, Reed Bailey played for 3 years at Davidson. The last 2 seasons, he's been a consistent double-figure scorer. Last year, he averaged 18.8 points, shot 41.5% from three. In fairness, that was on a very low volume of threes. I think he only took 41 or 42. So don't get crazy excited about that number. And you really like the production there. On the other hand, he only averaged 6.1 rebounds. A guy who's 6'10" on a team that's, hardly making all their shots, that's not an eye-popping number. And then you look at his percentages that kind of tell a similar story, that maybe he is not necessarily the best rebounding big, sort of on the planet. On the other hand, though, he is an exceptional passer. He averaged almost 4 assists per game last season, 3.8 assists per game. He had an assist rate that was in the top 200 nationally. It actually went up in conference play. He also draws 6.5 fouls per 40 minutes, and he made 77% of his 226 free throws a season ago. So I don't think either of us really expected it, how likely it was going to be for Malik Reneau to stick around. But use Reneau as an example. These are 2 players that ostensibly play the same position on the floor, and they do it completely differently. If Indiana had wanted to retain Malik Reneau, they probably would have had to put a big dollar figure in front of him, just like they probably had to put a pretty big dollar figure in front of Reed Bailey. But the players that Indiana would recruit if Indiana had secured Reneau's return, if that's what Indiana wanted, and again, I don't think either of us expected he would come back. But if Indiana had pursued Malik Reneau, gotten him to say, I'm staying, I'm signing on, and I'm going to play the 4, which is essentially what he is. The players that you need to complement Malik Reneau at that position are different than the players you need to complement Reed Bailey at the same position, I think, in some key respects. And so it is about the money, but it's also about, essentially, I think, at least in my mind, it's also about saying what Indiana is going to need when it starts recruiting its role players and its depth pieces and the players that go sit a little further down the bench is going to be informed heavily by who Indiana commits at the front end of its roster in terms of its highest usage players, its most important players. And so I think that that's why I guess it sort of makes sense to me that Indiana is kind of doing this roster build front to back, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think it works with what I'm saying in terms of you have to, if you go all in on a player and have to spend more, the quality or the type of player that you're going to be able to sort of land after that, you're going to have to change your expectations and may have to make sacrifices where, depending on how much, if Lamar Wilkerson drives up his price, you'll have less for those other pieces, and you're going to be recruiting a different class of players because of it. So, I mean, they're tied together. I just think that money is probably driving a lot of all these conversations in recruiting right now, especially with the house settlement sort of in limbo, or I don't know what the right limbo is, not maybe the best word because it looks like it's going to get passed, but just
but
sort of
it's going through further deliberation.
Correct. And so, I think that's impacting a lot of these conversations, and just how all these things are coming together.
Kind of concurrent to that is the staff, which some pieces were kind of put into place pretty quickly. Tanner Sturtz comes over, or not Tanner, Tanner Sturtz. I keep confusing him with Bennett Sturtz, who's the point guard who went with Ben McCollum to Drake and then Iowa. Comes over as director of operations. Nick Norton is an assistant. Drew Adams comes from Cincinnati. Of course, Indiana fans will know him well, a Bloomington native who spent time on staff before. Is very well connected in the region, especially, but not exclusively, through his father. We've seen Indiana now just recently add Kenny Johnson, who is on his second tour of duty in Bloomington now. His reputation as both a recruiter and a developer, kind of a relationship builder with players, is very strong. And I should give a shout out to Aaron Ferguson, the sports editor, who had this today that Indiana is going to hire Mike Bargan, who is the associate head coach at Bradley. It's going to be in an off-court role. I think some people have asked, is that going to be like a GM type thing? I don't know if we're talking GM or if maybe we're talking more of kind of like a chief of staff role, similar to what Indiana maybe envisioned for Thad Matta before Mike Woodson decided to move away from it. I think, there's probably room for at least one, if not two more full-time assistants. And if Bargan isn't in that general manager type role, you and I sat down with Darian DeVries. He said he wants one, so I don't think the staff is complete. But you're certainly in a place, especially as you start to approach a very important sort of visit period in the calendar. The kids Indiana is going to have on campus this week. It's going to continue into next week, or this weekend, continue into next week, and then into next weekend. It does feel like Indiana is starting to pull together enough staff to maybe execute these visits at a slightly more detailed level.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought Kenny Johnson. The ties to Indiana, I think, are notable in terms of what he's trying to get out of, building a staff that he's favored, sort of less about familiarity or like long ties to himself, and then trying to kind of get coaches familiar with the Big Ten and Indiana specifically. And then Kenny Johnson, obviously you mentioned in your story, he was tied to sort of the Louisville scandal of old, and has sort of been working. This is his first job back in the sort of Power Four since that. And
well, it was at Georgetown last year, and I think for the purposes of basketball specifically, we have to consider the Big East one of the power conferences. But I mean, Georgetown is one of the worst programs in that conference, so I think your point is somewhat valid.
Yeah. So, just an interesting, obviously, that all goes through Scott Dolson as well, and so everybody felt sort of comfortable with the hire. But I do think that was notable in terms of feeling comfortable and confident enough, and of doing that with a guy that just, when you kind of read through the coverage, there was certainly some questions over his culpability in terms of, was he dragged into it and things like that. But just having the faith and confidence and backing of the administration to sort of make that kind of move and hire somebody with a little bit of baggage.
No, yeah, I mean, listen, I think there is just generally, I think, part of the conversation I think everybody's having here is like where, like, what is baggage anymore? Like, I just covered a Final Four that included Bruce Pearl and Kelvin Sampson, and Will Wade did an NIL panel apparently, and someone tweeted anyway that Wade said something like, I'm the only person up here who could have talked to you about NIL a few years ago. Like, what is baggage anymore? When, I mean, listen, one of the coaches, and at this point, I think it's unlikely to happen, just because I don't think he's going to leave. I don't think he's going to leave where he's at. But Preston Murphy, who's one of the top assistants at Alabama, has been a top target for Darian DeVries since he got hired. He served a 2-year show cause penalty related to all that stuff. Now he's considered one of the best recruiters in the country. He's probably not that far away from his own head job, and I think that's why he's, at least as things stand today, looks likely to stay at Alabama, is because he feels like he's pretty close to the next step in his career and doesn't necessarily need to come to Indiana to make that. But my point is, again, it just gets back to the question of, like, what is baggage? I mean, and I understand people who are sort of like, I don't know that I love this, and I understand people who will say, should Indiana kind of be getting into this so early? But again, it's like, what is Indiana getting into? You know what I mean? Like, what about this is a problem at a level that I think people are associating it with, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, my point was more that it speaks to me about Darren DeVries in terms of like, look, he found somebody that he wants to coach, and he made it work, and the administrative believes in him enough to sort of to do that and not have any issues. And just because, like you said, you're associated with, but I do think there's a very big difference between and maybe that's a separate conversation. Will Wade wearing that as like a badge of honor or pride, it, to me, is sort of ridiculous when you so clearly skirted the rules. Not skirted, just blew past the rule, like you were
Yeah, I was
so
just
willing
saying.
to cheat. That's different than what when you read the stories. Kenny Johnson, what happened to him, and what the allegations were, and all that. I mean, they were nothing. I don't think it's huge. But he is associated with it, and so the idea that the administration is going to have a say in that and going to sort of Darren DeVries gets him through, and so I thought that was notable.
No, it's fair. I mean, and again, the counterpoint is, I think anymore, there's kind of this line that says you don't need recruiters anymore because you can just recruit out of the portal. I guess my natural counterpoint is, don't you still need those relationships? Don't you still need coaches that can connect well with athletes, perhaps even better than they could with recruits, because you don't get that much time. So you better be able to kind of find that level playing field with portal recruits pretty quickly. And of course, yes, the money speaks. I totally get that, but you still need, I think, people in those positions that really build like a level of comfort with your players and with your recruits, whether it's high school or it's portal. And Johnson brings a real background in that. I am also interested in, and we'll see kind of how all this shakes out. I am interested in Mike Bargan's role. We were told it's not an on the court role. I mean that maybe it's the GM position. Again, I am curious if Indiana's trying to find another sort of Thad Matta type piece, because that was, I think it's easy to forget now. I mean, that was a pretty substantial part of Scott Dolson's vision for that program under Mike Woodson. And it was always perceived as, well, Indiana is giving Woodson, this guy that knows the college game better because he doesn't, this guy who knows the Big Ten really well, etc. But I kind of wonder if that's actually just a position, sort of like whether you call it like a chief of staff or a special assistant. If that's not a position that maybe is more just kind of part of Scott Dolson's vision for the program, and less was just specific to Woodson. It's more just that Dolson sort of approaching the idea that head coach can't do it all himself. It's good to have somebody else that can handle a lot of logistical issues, fence political issues, whatever. And I don't mean political like national political climate. I mean just the politics of doing your job in college basketball. Because it just strikes me, and listen, I understand Bradley is a substantial step up from, or Indiana is a substantial step up from Bradley, but to be leaving an associate head coach position with a relatively successful Valley program that you've been part of for 10 years for an off the court role at Indiana tells me that there's more here, that there are more layers to this, essentially, that would lure a guy away from being basically the lead assistant to a pretty good Valley head coach to come to Indiana and leave the floor entirely.
Well, wouldn't the salary be like substantially different no matter what the position was?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, and listen, again, maybe it's just the money talking, but I don't know. I just that grabbed me a little bit. I was surprised that someone who
But if it was the GM role, I mean, because and he said he was still sort of developing about what that would be. Hiring a coach that's more sort of, I mean, he's got his backgrounds is like running offenses and doing all that sort of stuff, which is not what the GM role he kind of talked about possibly being, or working with the staff and the administration to facilitate NIL deals and things like that. I mean, maybe he's going in it would probably say he's going in a different direction with that role, or because that doesn't seem like a hire that would sort of be about sort of the dollars and cents of it all, and sort of that background part, where a lot of what the GMs are doing in the college is more related to sort of roster management and construction, and not sort of the basketball part of it all.
No, I mean there's a pronounced like just sort of professional, I guess, model to a lot of it, and that's with players too. Like, I mean, virtually everybody Indiana's committed or targeted at this point. And I mean, this will change, but almost everybody that I'm aware has come through for a visit only has 1 year left, of eligibility. And so, maybe you can get some underclassmen to commit. Maybe you can, get a couple freshmen that have opened their process up, or some true freshmen, I mean, here in the spring. But, listen, I mean, the way Indiana is tracking, Indiana is going to have to do even more of this in recent or in the coming years. Just the same way we've talked about with football, where that roster churn kind of doesn't stop, and you can. I mean, Kelvin Sampson said something interesting this weekend. He said basically, we're not a portal program. We're not one of those programs that kind of lives in the portal. He says because you can kind of get portal dependent, where you're constantly taking portal kids, but that means that on the back end, you're constantly having to replace them with other portal kids. Now, listen, every coach's ideal would be a balance, right, between like the short, the medium, and the long term, especially a coach in his first year in the job. But, there is also kind of that element of, the way you organize this and the way you execute this, it needs to be about more than just success next season, basically.
Well, yeah, but I think, I don't know. In basketball in particular, it seems like if you're a bench player, you're just going in the portal every year, no matter what. At this point, it seems like that it does the settlement and does the new sort of financial model change that. I mean, that's probably the hope. But I mean, I don't know how any basketball. I mean, there's been a few programs that are exceptions. Purdue was one of them, but then, obviously this year, things have changed. And so I just think it's become harder I mean, the last 2 years, even without the coaching change, Indiana, was going to lose like its entire bench to the transfer portal again, regardless. And so it's just sort of like, it's hard in basketball where, is like replacing 9 players much different than replacing 7. It's just sort of it's to the point now where I think you've got to predict essentially, or sort of plan for, you're probably going to be replacing, unless you're relying on high school guys that you can kind of sort of develop a little more, 6 to 7 guys a year, unless things change here with revenue sharing, and guys feel the ability more comfortable kind of staying. But
I mean, listen, you can do it though. I mean, again, I don't mean to keep circling back to Houston, but I did spend a lot of time on them the last couple of weekends.
I mean, that's one program. That's one.
Sure, but okay, but we also talked about Purdue all of last
and then they got hit this year, and so it's like,
they went to the Sweet 16.
No, but
24 games, who went to the Sweet 16.
No, but they're not. But not being immune to the idea where, look, success doesn't sell anymore. Like, I don't think that you could say that, we've had, we've reached 4 straight Sweet 16s. I don't think that matters to kids as much if you're not playing and there's money to be made elsewhere. And so I think the propensity to go in, like if you name one program that's avoided that, I mean, there's 300 others that aren't. And so, like, those are the exceptions to the rule. And like, yes, does Indiana want to maybe get there? Sure. I think I agree with you that every coach wants a more sustainable model, which is why they went to court and are trying to settle the house settlement to sort of stop this sort of having to turn rosters over in their entirety from year to year. But I think that's a hard thing to do. It's not going to get done in 1 year, and it's probably not going to get done in 2. And so, I also don't know that the settlement's going to solve any of these problems.
No, I agree with that. That like it's not going to happen in 1 year, because you also don't want to wind up in a situation where half your roster is freshmen that you took to fill out your roster, because then A, you might have compromised on quality in some cases, and B, you also just suddenly have like a huge tonnage of players you have to develop. Like there's, I think sometimes we forget there's only so many hours in a day, and there are only so many hours you can spend with your players. And if you have a freshman class of like 7 guys that are all going to need a lot of attention and detail and preparation and development, that's going to have to take away from something else you do. Like that's going to take away from I don't know, like chemistry building and leadership, or X's and O's, or install something,
And on the
something's got to
surface,
give.
I completely agree. Like from just looking at from my perspective as just a reporter or just somebody who covers, like it makes a certain amount of sense to try to get at least 2 more freshmen on there to sort of balance it out a little bit.
Yeah.
So in theory, you can count on 3 players you're carrying over. But
Well,
but my point is, can you like is anything? There's nothing guaranteed anymore in terms of like, yeah, you can land 3 freshmen, but they could all redshirt and decide they didn't have they can make more money elsewhere, or they could play and try to make money elsewhere. I just don't. It's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I think it's like there's no guarantee, there's no path to sort of having a roster that carries over year to year that we've seen on a sort of wide scale basis. Yes, there's been exceptions or two, but I
well,
don't think any sort of coach has sort of cracked the equation there because of the
again,
financial.
I mean, I think there. I mean, I think there are more than you give them credit for. Like Michigan State, for example, only had one transfer in its top 9 this year. I'm looking at Ken Palm. I'm looking at their, kind of their they
But
sort
they've
things.
been a sort of a Clemson type program that has not relied on the portal both
Okay,
ways.
but I understand it. But I've given you 3 programs now. Look, I've
But has
given
that
you.
been to there? But has that been to Michigan State? But people that that's not that could be used to Michigan State's detriment as well because they haven't chose to fill the holes that they could use in the portal, right? Like so, I
But
mean,
2 of
like
the programs I gave you, one was the national runner-up last year, and another was a national runner-up this year. I'm just saying it is possible, and I'm saying that with like smart coaching and good culture, and of course the right resources to be able to retain these players, you can do it. You don't have to replace half your roster every year. I do agree with you that it's not going to happen in the first 2 or 3 years, because just by the nature of it, you've got to get some of your guys and develop. And hey, listen, some of those can be, you can take like a sophomore transfer, and if they're with you, if they redshirted their freshman year and they're with you for 4 years, like that still kind of counts, right? Like that's
no, absolutely.
that.
And Coach Signetti has called like the guys with 2 years like gold, essentially. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, like I mean
like
that's
we're thinking about like Elijah Surratt,
yeah,
for Kurt
yeah.
Cigneti.
Or
Like I mean
Aiden
that.
Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, like all those guys that came back were essentially what we're talking about, and
Yeah,
that I agree with. But I just think it's in basketball in particular, it seems harder, and I think the majority of the country are dealing with. Yes, there are a handful of exceptions, but I don't know. Like when you look at the all, I mean the what I don't know what the last number was 1,500, 2,000 players in the portal. It speaks to the idea that not many people are staying. Like
yeah. No,
I mean the
I
numbers
think
show
that's
that.
fair.
Like I don't know.
I'm just saying, I think it's possible to get the your program, you in the general sense, you obviously in this case being Indiana, to a place where you don't have to anticipate 5 transfers every year, where you are doing a little bit more of what a Michigan State or a Purdue or a Houston is doing,
But
which
what if you
is
don't want? What there's alternatively? What if you don't want that? What if you want to be a
yeah.
team that has a more NBA professional model where you're sort
I
of
mean that
you're more
Mike
focused
Woodson
on
did.
your edges?
I mean, just frankly, Mike Woodson, I think it's fair to say, Mike Woodson wanted to just constantly stay old, and I think it never felt like, with the exception of some elite freshmen, there was as much sort of like long term commitment to developing younger. I mean, like, listen, these are small sample sizes, but like look at what Caleb Banks did, right? I
Yeah.
mean, he leaves for 1 year and goes to Tulane, and he's great. And I didn't. It was surprising to me that he wound up at DePaul after the year that he had at Tulane, but that's kind of neither here nor there. Um, the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is schedule. We knew about the Marquette game. We knew about the Kentucky game. The Louisville game has now been confirmed. It's expected to be not confirmed by the program, but confirmed sort of widely in reporting and in dispatches. That will be in Indianapolis. The date that's been thrown around is December 6th. So you have now, I think, 3, very meaningful, and I don't want to look at way too early top 25s, but I think Louisville tied for second in the ACC last year. They finished 28th in Ken Palm. Marquette, I think, kind of dipped a little bit toward the end of the season. They lost, I think, 6 of their last 10, or 6. Yeah, I think it was 6 of their last 10 in the regular season, and then got upset in the first round. They finished 29th in Ken Palm. Of course, Kentucky went to the Sweet 16 in Mark Pope's first year. My point is, these are all games that probably should hold up for Indiana. That winning even one or two of them, and it's worth saying none of these three are going to be played in Bloomington.
Does
So,
the game bridge count as a home game because of the miles?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, the answer.
What they did Harvard 2 years ago, and did that count as
I
a
mean,
home?
like Ken Palm calls it a semi-home. I don't remember what the committee. I don't know that we ever really asked like what the committee considered, because like it's somewhat valid when teams play Penn State at the Palestra. That's supposed to be a home game. On the other hand, I would make the argument that there's a difference between IU playing Penn State at the Palestra and Louisville playing Indiana and Indianapolis. Like that's still a 2-hour drive for Louisville fans. Like that's there will be that
I just
building.
didn't know if it was. I just didn't know if it was specifically on mileage alone. Like if your team is
I,
playing
I
within a
I
certain.
haven't heard like a distinct
I got you.
sort of like threshold you have to meet.
Yeah.
I would personally imagine they consider that a neutral site game. They always consider the Crossroads Classic games neutral site games. And those
That's the same thing. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's very close. Obviously, those were all teams within the state of Indiana, but like Louisville's closer to Indianapolis, for example, than Notre Dame is.
yeah.
And Louisville is likely to bring more fans to that game than some of those IU Notre Dame games, in some of Notre Dame's down years in the Classic. So I would guess that'll be a neutral. Marquette will be a neutral. Kentucky will be a road. I do expect at this point Indiana to add a high major non-conference home opponent. It may not be a terribly sort of eye-popping one, if you know what I'm saying. It may not be a Kansas. It may be something a little bit more on along the lines of like South Carolina last season. But I do expect Indiana to have at least one sort of name brand opponent at home, a high major team, whether it's somebody from the middle of the pack in the SEC or the ACC or the Big 12, whatever. I mean, to me, in a coach's first year, that's probably enough. I think the
You don't
scheduling.
anticipate a tournament, right? Because
No, they're not in an MTE. Well, I think the Marquette game is
it's
technically
part of an event. Yeah, isn't it an
but
event?
but it's not a tournament in
Right, right.
the Maui Atlantis sense. No, I don't think they're going to be in anything like that. I think if they add that high major home game, I think that'll be it personally.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you consider the calculus is always going to be a little bit different between teams that play in conferences with 18 game league schedules and teams that play in conferences with 20 game league schedules. I think 4 is probably a comfortable number for a coach in his first season. We also know that Darian DeVries is going to take a foreign tour. He told us that when we sat down with him a week or two ago. So,
Barring an unforeseen development, because they were seeking out planning. We should say.
Yeah, they'd engaged a few companies that tend to put those things together. He did. I mean, this was kind of parsing words. It sounded like it was going to be a little bit more functional.
It's late in the game to plan these, so you kind of take what you can get in terms of when you go to these firms that are planning these. Your options aren't everywhere in the world. There's probably specific places that have availability and things like that. Things that you could work with.
I mean, he said that the trip's going to be about us. And he kind of compared it to taking West Virginia. I think they went to Italy last season. And he said that was about like the experience for the kids. He said,
well, because you made the comparison to Tom Crean taking wanting the competition being kind of the driving force.
Yeah.
And he said the competition would be secondary to sort of the team building part of it. But he also added the idea that the turnaround time for this at West Virginia last year was very short. So you do have more limited options than if you had done this a year out. So both are sort of hurdles that they had to climb, or not.
I just wondered if he was basically sort of nodding at the Bahamas. Just because Atlantis is just set up for that. They get European teams that basically just almost come be house teams, like teams in C2, and they just
you just want to go to the Bahamas again. This is your campaign.
Every year, let's go.
We know what you're doing.
They're going to do the Baja Mar tournament next year, and then Atlantis 2 years after that. And
you emailed them like all the spots to hit.
I'm going to buy property down in Nassau. I'm just going to have my own house. I'm like Sean Connery. Anyway, the point is, I think the meatiest part of the schedule is probably put together as well.
Yeah, no, that
So,
makes sense.
I mean, I know there's been some. It's funny because we're running short on time here, but there has been a fair amount of sort of concern from Indiana fans. Is this moving too slowly? Or should we be concerned we don't have more players on roster? And I mean, we'll see. I'm not gonna. I never promise anything. I'm like, yeah, if they keep striking out, then sure, that's a problem.
Well, but I think part of when we sat down with him was one of the big points he emphasized. He's like, look, this will take as long as it, because, and you were hammering the drum for that. You're like, look, the April 7th settlement's coming up. Are you worried? And no, I'm just joking, but that's what you did on the podcast.
I had an actual drop.
He's like, but no, he's like, look, it doesn't matter. Like, I got to get the players I want. I got to get the coaches I want. And so to me, it was less surprising based on what he said to us and at the podium.
Yeah.
Because, he really said, look, this is going to take some time.
I also think that just generally, if you actually sit down and say it all out loud, like, more has happened than I think people realize. Like, I think if you sit there and you say, here are all the players in the fold now, here are all the coaches in the fold now, here's all the forward planning that's being done now, like, here's all the stuff that's being executed kind of all at once. Again, reminding everyone that there are only so many hours in the day. I think more.
You say that as a parent of two young kids. I think I think that's where that comes from.
We maximize the hours around here. There's no question about that. Any other business?
No, and just to your point, like, I know that they're going to recruit. The roster size probably 13, but I mean, really, you need like 9. Like, that's like, so you got 4. Yeah. So I mean, like, that's the next 5 are kind of what you need. And so when you look at it like that, I don't think it's like, the roster number's not great, obviously, because you have plenty of work to do. But like, to your point, the frontline guys and the key guys in rotation, it's not that many. It's more like 4 or 5 guys that you want, that you can rely on.
And that's where, again, I come back to the idea that, like, you do smaller numbers of visits, you're more selective with your heavy hitters, and then the players you get for those positions inform, the role players, the bench players that you go look to fill in around them. And I'm not surprised that that's the approach Indiana State.
Well, he's got to do an hour of research on the Bahamas every day to make sure he knows everything. Read your email.
I'm taking care of that for him.
Your lengthy emails probably take a long time to read. So
I'm chief of Bahamas for IU basketball. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners for Friday, April 11th. Again, we'll be back early next week with a spring game dedicated sort of preview, look at everything that's happened in the spring for IU football and where everything's kind of headed toward the spring game on Thursday. But for now, for the Indianapolis Star and the Bloomington Herald Times, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.